Welcome, everybody, to our show today. I'm very happy to have Tracy Franken here. She is from Beyond Obedience up in Nova Scotia in Canada. And she's here today to discuss with us how to figure out and what is a Dogonality. So, Tracy, this is our first time officially meeting. Welcome to the show and glad that you're here.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I've been a fan of yours for a while. I'm that creeper that's on your page all the time. But this is our first time actually being able to meet.
So yes. It's interesting. All my podcasts before, with the trainers, I think there was only maybe one video. All the others were audio. And so now I get to finally put faces to the names and everything. So it's kind of nice to have this dynamic to go along with everything.
It is.
Yeah. All right. So where did this Dogonality, before we dive deep in, where did this Dogonality phrase, term, philosophy come from for you?
Well, it's a fascinating story of me and my father, believe it or not. And I won't make it too long, but basically my father and I were at an auction and my dad turned to me and he was like, "They are selling baby horses for only $200. We should get one." And he elbowed me and I was like, I don't want a baby horse. And he was like, "Well, you grew up with horses, horses, you've ridden horses. How hard could it be to get?" And before I know it, the paddle's going up and he's bidding on this horse. And wow. I'm freaking out. I'm like, "Oh my God, Dad, I can't have I've never raised a horse. I don't know how to train them. I've only taken riding lessons." And he was like, "How hard could it be?" Next thing you know, a week later, I get this truck that pulls up with a trailer. Two guys manhandle a baby horse out of the trailer. They tie it to a pole. And they're like, "If I were you, I wouldn't let him go. You're never going to catch him again."
Oh my gosh.
Like forever?
What?
Like I can't let him off forever? And so I was like, "Oh my, what do I do?" And of course I had to let him off the pole. I had to untie him and he took off. And I thought, you know what? It's fine. I know what to do. I've had horses. Like I've been around horses. So I went and grabbed a bucket of grain and I shook this bucket of grain at him. And he ran away. It scared him. And I realized he's never seen grain, doesn't know what a bucket of grain is. So now I'm just an idiot in a field running after a horse, scaring it with a bucket of grain. That was how that started. So it led me down this incredible journey in this path of learning natural horsemanship. It kind of forced me into it because I'm a person that innately understands dogs. I get dogs. I get predators. I didn't understand prey. And so I started this journey of natural horsemanship, learning how to actually talk and communicate and understand how the prey animal and the prey mind works. And within that learning, they actually had they broke their horses down into, they called it horsenalities. And I remember when I went through it, I was like, this is fascinating. And I wonder if I can do the same thing for dogs. Now, obviously, there's a big difference, right? Prey versus predator. Yep. Huge difference. Yep. So it took me a while to actually kind of dig into this and kind of break it down. But throughout my time sort of learning horses and then working with people and their dogs, I really became almost fascinated by this concept because nowadays everybody is inundated with the dog lingo and there's so much information out there. My dog's being dominant, my dog's being submissive, my dog's being whatever. We all hear about the different quadrants and trainings and positive only and negative only and all of that stuff. And clients come to us with some knowledge of what they think those terms mean. But I think it's caused more confusion than anything else. So I started just testing this out with my own clients, going, what if I broke it down differently for you? And the results were really great. People seem to kind of, if I could say to them, just ignore dominant, submission, positive, negative, all of that stuff. Just ignore that for a second and let's look at your dog like this. And I reframed the entire thing for them and came out with this Dogonality chart. Now, before I get into it, and I was mentioning this to Ian, that dog trainers are probably the hardest people to get them to suspend all your other things for a moment.
Yeah, like just shelving it. Just put on the shelf for a second.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying put it over here for a second just so that you can open your mind to it. But clients really get it for sure.
Yeah.
So the idea here is that it is still a quadrant. So I want you to think about the quadrant as you would the X and the Y axis. And on the vertical axis, the Y axis, at the top of that, we're going to have something called left brain. Okay? You can draw it along if you want, Ian. Just draw it.
I'm going to do it just like everybody else, hopefully.
I'm going to do that. Right. So on the bottom of that y-axis, I want you to write right brain. So there's left brain on the top, right brain on the bottom.
Okay.
In brackets, beside left brain, I want you to put thinking. Okay. And again, before anybody, especially with any sort of anatomy of the brain, please understand, I know it's not actually left brain, right brain. We're just doing it for simplicity's sake.
For sure.
Right? So left brain, we're going to say, is the thinking side of the brain. Beside right brain, I want you to write instinctual, right? That's the instinctual side of the dog. Okay?
Okay.
Now on our horizontal axis, our x-axis, on the left-hand side, I want you to write introvert. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to write extrovert. So we have left brain, right brain, introvert, extrovert. Very simply, we're just going to put in brackets beside the introvert, introverts don't move their feet, as opposed to the extroverts that move their feet.
And probably quickly.
And very quickly, yes. Okay, so let's look at these 4 categories of a dog's personality. Again, I want to point out to our dog trainers, this is their innate qualities, not their trained qualities, okay? Because I have, we'll mention it at the end, but I do have a quiz that people take if they want to find out their dog personality. And dog trainers take it and they go, well, I didn't really understand it. My dog doesn't do any of those things because I trained them not to do that. I want you to think about the dog before training. What would your dog innately do? If you open up the door, would your dog bolt out? Not because you trained him not to, but would he do it instinctively? Kind of.
Right.
Okay. So if we start in that upper left quarter or quadrant, we have what's called a left brain introvert. Okay. So that dog there is a thinking dog that doesn't move their feet. Okay. Some of the qualities of that type of dog are going to be, they're very clever. They're incredibly clever because they're a thinking dog, right? They're using more their left side of their brain as opposed to their right side of their brain. But they are also dogs that don't move their feet. So they tend to be non-responsive. They can also appear disinterested. And some people will call these dogs stubborn, right? Or even lazy. And the challenge with these kind of dogs is that they have a what's in it for me kind of attitude, right? When you're working with a dog like this, they're going to be like, why do I want to do that? What's in it for me? Is there anything in it for me? And we're usually, when we're training, we're going to respond to that with a, yes, here's a cookie. And that's going to work, right? They're easily bribed, if you will, right? With food or treats. But they're also the type of dog that's going to up that ante of, you know what, that cookie isn't working anymore. Now you got to give me something better because it's not as interesting as what I'm doing over here. So that's just a little brief overview of what that left brain introvert dog is like. So these guys here, again, they're clever, but they tend to be stubborn or lazy, or we think they are. They're not actually. They're just, you don't inspire them to actually want to do anything, really, is what it comes down to. And I have a couple of those dogs in my pack. I have a lot of Newfs that are like that. Newfoundland dogs are they are thinking dogs, but people often blow them off as being lazy couch potatoes. That doesn't mean they're not using their head. They're a working breed. They just don't, they're not interested in what you're doing because you're not upping your intelligence game to actually meet them where they are.
Yeah, and to me, those dogs are more of the processors. You know, they're kind of sitting back and they're just kind of taking everything in. They're not going to jump into the middle of the crew.
No.
Take a spin through, sniff everybody, say hi. They're the ones that may be on the outskirts of the group. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they're the ones that are just kind of taking everything in. They just are kind of like
everything.
Yeah.
Yes, they know everything that's going on, and they're taking notes, right?
Yes,
like they're keeping track of things. right?
Yeah, it's the body language, right? They're not missing anything. They understand what's going on. It's very calculated too.
Yes, because they're thinking. They're
Yes.
incredibly smart.
Yep.
All right, so let's look at the other left-hand side of that. Let's go over to beside that on the upper right-hand side. That's the left brain extrovert. So these are your thinking dogs that move their feet. And a large portion of our working breeds are going to fall into that category, right? These guys here, they're smart, they're fast, they're charismatic, but they're also mischievous, right?
Sure. Especially if you don't work them.
Especially if you don't work them. So the challenge with these dogs, if you're working with them, is they are fast and they're frantic, right? They tend to be working. What it essentially means is they're usually quicker than us physically. Most dogs are quicker than us physically, but they're quicker than us physically. But quite often they're quicker than us mentally, right? They're ahead of the game on us. They're 3 steps ahead of us if you're not really paying attention and working them to what their personality is. So for them, they are really kind of challenging, and they'll just make up their own games and their own fun if you can't keep up with them. They are. We often see. I mean, I'm sure you see this. We often see like OCD like behaviors that come out with this type of dog because they're just so smart. They're so fast, and it's hard for us to catch up.
Yeah, okay? They want to work. They, in my thing, if you will, as far as daycare boarding or board and train. To me, those are the ones that they start to maybe pace too.
Yes.
You know, and then it becomes this, it becomes the pattern. And then you're like, okay, we got to block this. You got to start working the brain. You got to get them engaged. It can be difficult.
It comes out somewhere for sure. It's got to come out somewhere. And that's the extrovert part of them, right? The energy either has to be matched both with physical and with mental. But if you're lacking in one or the other, then things are going to come out in negative ways that you don't want.
For sure.
For sure. Right. So let's jump down to the bottom of that quadrant. We're going to talk about the right-brained dogs now. So our right-brained dogs are the instinctual dogs. These are the dogs that are working in their instincts. So their drives, like prey drive or defense drive, all of those things. And if I'm explaining this to my clients or my actual friends or whatnot, I don't necessarily want them to think about drives that way. I just want you to think, are they thinking or are they being instinctual, right? That's what I want people to think about. But that's what they're doing in there. So if we move to that right brain introvert side, the left side of that quadrant on the bottom, these guys here are instinctual type dogs that don't move their feet. So I have to, because of the predator aspect of this, I break the right brain down into both confident and unconfident, right? So there's a confident aspect and then there's the unconfident aspect. So if you're right brain introvert and you're confident, these guys are kind of scary, right? These are the dogs that aren't moving their feet. So they're staying very quiet. They seem obedient, but they are very distrustful. They're working in their instincts rather than their thinking brain. And quite often we have a hard time connecting to these dogs. Right? We have a hard time and we'll try to combat that with obedience and stuff, and they're not going to hear it. So it's a challenge for sure. Now, if they're unconfident on that side, then these guys here are the ones that are going to be in a bit of a fear cycle. These are the ones that are quiet. They appear obedient because they're not moving their feet, but they're distrustful. They're unpredictable. They're timid. They tend to be shy and they'll freeze and then explode.
Yeah.
Right?
Almost feral.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So those kind of dogs are really going to struggle. And I think where we go wrong with them in a lot of cases is that part because they're not moving their feet, because they don't look like a traditional fearful dog that might be all like skittish. We think they're fine. So we think that they're sitting there being obedient. And meanwhile, they're inside themselves just like, oh my God, I'm going to die. 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 Wah! And then they explode. Right?
Yeah.
And then they snap or they react. And then people are just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my dog did that. And meanwhile, this has been something that's been building for a long time.
And it's interesting that you say that too, because in the beginning you talked about the horse is the prey, right? And the dog is the predator. And I remember, I'm going to give him credit, but Jonathan from Oregon Tales was the first one to introduce me to that. Even though a dog is a predator, they can have a prey state of mind.
Oh, absolutely.
And to me, this is kind of what this quadrant is. What you're referring to is that they feel like they're prey. They feel like their world is probably going to end, especially if they get cornered and you're going to get that explosion. And it's sometimes their world is just crumbling down around them. And to me, my interpretation of what you're saying is those instincts kick in, and it's fight or flight to a degree.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where we will sometimes go wrong. And I'm going to give people some tips on how to deal with the different brains in a second. But let's move over to the right brain extrovert. So those are your instinctual dogs that move their feet. So on the unconfident side, those are the guys that are going to look panicked. They're going to be flighty and bolty and reactive. They can't stand still. Their eyes are darting. Their heads are darting. There's just all of this, oh, I'm going to die stuff. But it comes out in a physical manifestation rather than the other side, which is just going to hold it all in. But you also have the confident ones, right? My right brain extrovert confident guys are usually my high prey drive dogs. Those are the dogs that are hunting, they're searching, they're scanning, they're doing all those things, and they're chasing after stuff, right? So that's a different vibe, but still the same brain, right brain extrovert and right brain introvert. Whether or not they're confident or whether or not they're unconfident depends on how that manifests. So does all that make sense so far?
Yeah, I'm right here with you.
Okay, awesome. So what I always like my clients to look at once they sort of understand the grid and they get, what is my dog's innate personality? Now concept is fluid. This isn't, if you do the test and you go, oh, my dog's a right brain extrovert, that doesn't mean that they're stuck there. It's fluid. They can move in and out of these quadrants at any point of the day. Mm-hmm. Certain stimulus will move them. So it's a fluid concept. So I don't want people to get stuck in it. But what I want people to understand too is how we can actually influence and move them ourselves. So for example, if I have a right-brained extrovert, and he is unconfident and he's freaking out and he's doing his stuff, I have to ask myself, is my dog thinking right now? And if he's not thinking, right, he's right-brained, how do I get him to start thinking? How can I reach that brain to get him to move from this instinctual brain to a thinking brain? And a lot of people will go, well, I'll do obedience, right?
Yeah. Because they're looking for that engagement part of it.
Right. So you should do obedience, but the extreme right brain extrovert that's unconfident, that's freaking out, and he's in his instinctual mind, in the moment, he can't hear you.
No.
Obedience. He's not going to, you can shout English as a second language to this dog till you're blue in the face.
Yep.
It won't matter. You can't reach him. They can't reach that side of the brain. Mm-hmm. So if you have a dog that's like that, that's innately right-brained, extroverted, then you have to practice that. They have to practice that ability to flip that switch. How can I get my dog from a right-brained instinctual to thinking again? How am I going to be able to do that? And I have to practice it if I have a dog that's innately that way.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing with my introverts, right? My right brain introverts, I have to be able to reach the brain where they are. So in a lot of cases for me, if I have a dog that's freaked out and he's being reactive, there is no point in me going, sit, 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 sit. That's not going to help.
Yeah.
Right? I may have to move in front of him. I may have to, I call it the be the bear protocol, right? You're going to have to be a bigger predator than they are currently. And then you have to find a way to get them to use their feet. So I will move into a dog's space without saying a word and just be this bear presence and walk at them. Does a couple of things. They have to actually face the threat that's currently at them as opposed to the threat they think is over there.
Yeah.
But it also allows them, they also have to back up their feet. And when you get a dog to back up their feet, they have to start thinking about, where are my feet going? What's happening there?
Yeah.
What's coming at me, and I got to back up my feet. And then you'll almost see it. It's like a little snap. They'll go, oh, you're here.
Yeah.
When I get that snap, that's when I go, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Now let's sit, right?
Yeah.
Now I can reach your thinking brain because I got you to snap from one side to the other. So I want to make sure that when I have an issue, my dog is doing whatever. I got to think, is my dog thinking? If he's not thinking, shout and obedience commands isn't going to help me, right?
Yeah.
How can I reach him where he's at? And then how can I build my relationship to further assist that dogonality? And for a lot of cases, especially my right brain dogs, it's building in obedience, right? If you've got a dog that innately doesn't like to think, you have to build that into them. You have to help them think, right?
Yes.
And for my introvert versus extrovert, for my extroverts, I need to slow them down, right? That's that's my way to get to them. I need them to slow down. My left brain introverts or extroverts that are thinking, I'm going to create games that make them have to slow down. One, so that my human body can catch up to them.
Right.
Right. Just let's call a spade a spade. I cannot catch you, so I'm going to create a game that's my idea. And it's going to be fun, but I want to be able to catch up to you. And also it helps slow their brain down. Let's get them thinking, but in a way that makes it, conducive so that I can play along with you, right?
Yeah, it makes it healthy and it makes it a two-way interaction and not just this one-way tunnel vision kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's the big thing. Most of my work, my company's called Beyond Obedience for the fact that I like to take everything up beyond obedience. So how can I do obedience in a way that makes it so that you and I are actually doing this thing together, right? As opposed to there's just a repetitive, I'm just going to keep throwing a Frisbee or a ball for you over and over and over again. I'm going to drive up your adrenaline and then I'm going to wonder why you're jacked up, right?
I know. Yeah, it becomes a one-way road. It's autopilot. There's no thinking going on. It's just this I don't know. It's just this monotony is, I guess, the word. It's just the same thing over and over and over again.
And over and over again. And then
and especially we see with right, it doesn't. And then we had a dog stay with us a couple of years ago. They gave us the chuck it. They gave us a tennis ball, and they're like, we normally throw it 500 times for him a day. And we're like, I don't think we're going to be able to do that.
I don't have that kind of arm strength.
Oh my gosh. So I know what you're saying. It's a one-way street here.
Yeah. It's like that. You ever see that toy where it's the big bucket and you just train the dog to put the tennis balls in the bucket and it shoots it out automatically for you?
Oh, the lobster thing. Yeah. Like the tennis machine. Yeah.
Yeah. You could just do that. You don't even have to be there. You could just out the backyard and just do it. So
plug that baby in before you go off to work and unplug it when you get back.
When you get home, and then everything's great, right?
Yeah.
So for my extroverts, I'm always asking them to slow their feet down.
Yeah.
And for my my right brain extroverts, I need to be who I want them to be. I got to make sure that my energy calms them down instead of feeding into that. So I'm doing a lot of slow paced things to get them to slow down their feet. For my introverts, I want to do the exact opposite. I want to find ways, how can I get you to move your feet?
Yeah, got to get them.
Especially those right brain introverts that are scared, right? If I know that a dog is unconfident, they're right brain introvert, and they're just sitting within themselves and it's just festering inside them, that's all building up. I have to find a way to allow them to move their feet. So I need to find gains and encouragement, build trust. A lot of trust building stuff obviously has to go with that. Mm-hmm. But I don't want them to sit within themselves and just, keep internalizing all of that energy because it's there, it's just coming out and it's festering in. And I think those guys there are also the ones that end up with actually medical issues because of that, if we don't give them an outlet to move their feet. So my left brain introverts and my right brain introverts, I got to find ways to make them move their feet.
For sure.
And that can be done with food. It certainly can be done with treats. I'm not an anti-treat person, but I always want to tell people, especially if you've got a left brain, if you've got a thinking introvert dog that's always sitting there going, I would come, but what's in it for me?
Right.
Right? Yeah. They're like that. And I'm always offering them a treat. I'm going to start to wonder, am I actually influencing this dog because of me, or has the dog completely trained me just to be a Pez dispenser and just keep giving them food? Because the left brain introverts, they're training you. Like they are They are training you, and we will always, it's always easier to sort of fall into the treat thing. You just have to be really careful that your treat, I use my treats as a way that we can engage together rather than a bribe situation. So for my
Yes.
left brain introverts, I go and I hide treats for them, and then we find them together on a trail kind of a thing, as opposed to me going, here's a cookie for coming, and here's a cookie for sitting, and here's a cookie for doing all these things, because they'll just be like, okay, cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. But it's not about me, it's about the food. So I have to try to find a way to engage with those dogs in a better sort of way, so that I know that the treats aren't, it's about me and the treats, not it's about the treats and that person that hands it to me.
Yes.
Right?
Yep, absolutely. So how do people from here, Tracy, how do people determine what their dog's dogonality is? What's the best way for people to figure that out on their own?
Well, I do have a quiz. So that's one of the easier ways to do it, is you can take the quiz, and it will give you a little bit of direction on what kind of dog personality you have. But if you just want to sort of think about it in the sense of, is my dog innately, again, I'm going to keep putting that innately term out there. Is my dog innately a dog that is using their head? Are they thinking? Do they enjoy obedience? Or do I have a dog instead that's perhaps responding or reacting to the environment? Are they being instinctual? Do I have a dog that every time I walk out the door, he's scanning, searching, he's looking for the squirrel, he's looking for stuff, all of that stuff? That's a dog that's being instinctual in that moment, right? He doesn't really care about the human. We call them the dope at the end of the rope, right? He doesn't really care about them. He's just doing his own thing. Those dogs are going to be more right brain. And I should point out here too, there's no better personality or dogonality. There isn't a dogonality that is better than the other.
It's a good way to put it.
They're all uniquely their own. It's just important to kind of identify what kind of dog I have, so that I can cater how I interact and how I train them in a way that benefits the dog. That's why we always say there's no cookie cutter training for dogs.
I was just going to say that there's no blueprint for every dog. And this is a perfect example of where, dog owners can look at this and go, oh, so maybe this type of training isn't going to be the best for Fido, but this is going to be the best for Buddy, and to be able to customize that for each dog or each dogonality, as you're putting it.
Yeah. So if you want to take the quiz, you can kind of find out what your dog's innate dogonality is, but always keep in mind that it's fluid, right? They don't stay in one quadrant. They tend to stay on one side or the other when it comes to introvert, extrovert.
For sure.
But they can easily flow from left brain to right brain. They're currently thinking, they're currently, instinctual, however that works. So I usually say to people, rather than, finding out what my dog's exact dogonality is, because I don't want people to put their dogs in a box. That's not what I want.
Yeah, no.
But what instead I want you to do is, if your dog is responding, reacting, whatnot, I usually say to people, I want you to ask yourself, is my dog thinking? Is my dog currently thinking right now? If they are, then you got to meet them where they're at, right? And you can influence them through using English as a second language, because they're using that side of their brain. But if they're not thinking, and this is where I get most of the calls, right? Reactive dogs, my dog's reactive. Yeah. My dog is pulling, lunging, doing all those things. If your dog is in that brain frame right now, your dog is currently in right brain.
For sure.
What can you do to get him to shift back up to thinking brain, right? And that's the biggest thing. Is my dog thinking? If they're not, how can I get them back to thinking? How can I bring them back to Humansville, where I am?
Right? Yeah. And I think in those situations too, where if somebody feels like their dog is absolutely blown up, they're reacting, they're moving their feet forward. Number one, if you feel like you can't control that situation, then just get out of the situation, because at least you're going to slow them down, probably physically, definitely mentally, until you can start connecting with them and engaging with them. And then, and slow the process down a little bit, and then go back and figure out kind of what happened where, and where that threshold was, and what you feel like you can control as a dog owner too.
Exactly. And I will say, the one thing where this kind of thinking about it in this way helps people out is if you have, let's say, a right brain introvert, so that's your dog that's fearful, but they're not moving their feet, they kind of freeze. What do we always do? We're using food, we're trying to get them to change their emotional status about that trigger, all of that stuff. And that's training stuff, which is not bad, it's not wrong, it's just not what I do. It's not what I deal with. I want to get the human to think about, how can I reach this dog in this moment? So what I usually suggest is, rather than having your dog sit and then trying to feed them food, if they're a right brain introvert, you need them to move their feet.
Yes.
Right. You need to get them moving. So I would rather see you gain space, move your dog out of the situation that's causing them that stress, get them to move their feet, let all of that anxiety out, rather than have them sit there and go like this and internalize, and you trying to feed cookies at them and be like, feel better about
Right.
that dog. Right?
Yeah.
Just feel better. I would rather you move that dog out of that space, move their feet, get them moving, you'll see it actually come out of their body. But we've all been taught to be like, okay, there's the thing that scares you. I'm going to have you stop, and then I'm going to feed you cookies. And I'm not saying that that's not right. I'm just saying that I would move them first and then try to change their emotional state. Them moving their feet is a big one. And that's where I see a lot of people go wrong. I see a dog that's, gone right brain. They're gone a little bit nervous. They're freaking out a little bit, and they're internalizing, and people are like, here, have a cookie. And I'm like, that's not going to reach them right there. And a lot of those dogs won't even take the cookie. Right.
Yeah.
Because they can't.
It's nowhere near as valuable as the stimulation that's going on.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing we have to be, and I want to say this too, we have to be super duper careful of when we're giving our dogs food and treats, because people have probably heard me say this. I'm going to say it again. We can't reward what they're doing physically without rewarding what they're doing mentally at the same time.
Right.
So even if this dog is blowing up, and for some reason they're taking the food at the same time while you're trying to distract it, you're rewarding that. And so when you're saying, let's remove the dog from the situation first, let's get them more fluid, let's get them moving, let's get their attention, and then introducing food.
And then you can certainly bring it back in. Absolutely. But
no doubt.
I want to think about, where's my dog's mind at? Are they thinking? Or are they not thinking? If they're not thinking, how can I get that brain back to thinking?
Yes.
How can I, as your advocate, how can I assist you in that transition, in that moment? Right. And again, that's why I say you can take the quiz and you can kind of find out what your dog is innately. And that's kind of fun. I have a lot of dogs. I have a lot of left brain. I have everything in my pack. I have 18 dogs. So I have everything in this pack. So I have an opportunity to see how all of them play. And
it's always moving, right? Like
always moving.
Yeah.
It's always moving. But I can tell you my dog's innate personality, the noof that's lying down here, is a left brain introvert innately. Right? Does it mean that he doesn't get scared, that he doesn't go right brain? No, absolutely. He gets scared. Things startle him. Absolutely. But he's more likely to, on his own, navigate back to being left brain introvert without any assistance from me, because he's innately a left brain introvert, as opposed to my very fearful lab mix, who is a right brain extrovert. And I have to work him into being left brain. I have to work him all the time and be like, stay up here with me, because he was a feral dog. So I'm like, stay up here with me, keep thinking. But if he has a trigger, he's going to shoot back to right brain extrovert, and he's not going to come back on his own. I am going to help to assist him, because he's going to go back to where he is innately comfortable. That right brain extrovert is his innate character, and I have to honor that. I have to make sure that I'm, always accepting of who they are innately. So I will say, I'll leave the link to the quiz and people can take it, but I want you to think about it. If you take the quiz, I want you to think about, what would my dog do without the training? If you've done a lot of training so far, don't answer the questions as I think one of them is, if I open the door, my dog will bolt out the door, sit and stare at me. Like, there's all these different options. But if you have trained really hard to get your dog to stay beside you and not cross that threshold, but darn well that you have trained that behavior, then I want you to answer the question as, what would my dog innately do? Would my dog innately immediately start running out down the street and hunting for squirrels? If that's what he would innately do, that's his innate quality, his innate personality. And that's where they're going to tend to want to shift to when things go a little bit squirrely.
I've
right?
always thought like when we do evaluations here or some sort, or a board and train comes in, that I feel like putting a dog into a brand new scenario that they've never been in before, a brand new environment. I feel like that's almost you're saying innate. I just say default, right? Like this is what they just keep defaulting back to. It's right. If we wipe our computer clean of everything that we've put into it, and it goes back to default.
Yeah.
What kind of personality are we seeing, right? If we remove all the training, everything, put it in a new
Oh, I
situation.
like that. I like that. That's yes. I like you could certainly take innate and change it with default. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I often have that thought of like when we do an evaluation, I'm like, yeah, I know the dog, there is some stress here because it is brand new, but I'm also kind of wondering if this is who they really are to a degree. I obviously, if a dog runs feral, it's not going to run into a into a daycare with 30 other dogs and be like, "Hey guys, what's up?" Right? It's gonna create enough space for itself in its surroundings to be like, "Okay, this is my comfortable spot. This is my zone." But
Right.
yet, this is still who I really am.
Yes. Yes, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
So we have a really good question here. This is really good. So MC Courier, you talked about the dog's traits before training. What about a newly adopted dog? How long would you wait for decompression before assessing the dogonality? 3 weeks, 3 months? Where do you
Ooh,
sit with that?
that's a great question. And what I would say is in the newly adopted dog, I'm not going to pigeonhole them to anything. We have one of the sayings in my courses that I have is something called the how interesting moment. And for me, anytime a new dog comes in, every single moment is a how interesting moment. So I use the first, 3 months even to be able to go, okay, what's the pattern that I'm starting to see? And generally, and most people that adopt dogs hate me when I say this, but when I talk about pattern of predictability for dogs and creating a pattern of predictability for a newly adopted dog, I always tell people realistically, your dog has to experience all 4 seasons of the year twice before they can actually get a full pattern of predictability,
Mm-hmm.
before you can really say, okay, now I really get to know this dog. So I kind of chart their dogonality as I go along, right? And the dog may come in. I'm not going to see those qualities right away. It's going to, dogs come into a space and they're going to be all about survival. Who's in charge? Who's feeding me? What's going on? And then as they start to get comfortable in that space, now they're going to start to test what happens if I do this.
Yeah.
So I always sort of sit back and I do everything is such an observing thing. And I call it my how interesting moments. Like, how interesting. I used to think this dog was a right brain, but now I find out he's actually playing me. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I've been a fool this whole time watching this dog be like, and I'm like, oh, you're so scared, or you're so that. How many of us fall into that, right? Oh my God,
Yes.
the dog was so scared. So I'm going to sit back. And meanwhile, this dog is like, right?
Yes.
So then I'll be like, okay, you're not quite as right brained as I thought you were. And now I'm going to change how I address that. But that's why I mean to say it's all kind of fluid. But those first 3 weeks, 3 months, and I would say 2 years, you still might have something that comes up there. You go, oh, well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's always going to change, but that's a great question. So I just chart it. I kind of like, I make a mental note and I'd be like, my first assessment of this dog is that they are in this moment, right-brained introvert, right-brained extrovert. And as we move on, I'm going to be like, okay, maybe not. Maybe they're switching,
Yeah. I think we have to. I'm going to be kind of like you here. I don't go for a given number, but I think we have to wait at least 3 months. We always, you've probably used this term, the honeymoon phase, right? When we get a new dog or a puppy or whatever. And it's like the first week, the dog's been great. There's no accidents. There's no chewing. And you're like, just wait for it because it's coming. Because to me, I think it's that 3 month phase. I've learned a little bit about, I'm going to throw out a big word, neuroplasticity here and how it works with dogs and everything, and also with us. I think we got to give at least 3 months just for surroundings, let alone your interactions with your dogs. because it's a big deal, especially these days with COVID. Like everything's constantly changing. So
Yeah, for sure.
it's hard to put a number to that for me too.
I always talk about the pattern of predictability, right? And that's the dog's ability to predict within as close to 100% the outcome of the environment, the outcome of the experience. So when you figure that, in order for the dog to have that pattern of predictability, how much time has to go by before all different variants of that pattern can be exposed for them to go, oh, okay, now I get it. That takes time, right?
Yep. So that it does.
And if I can, from my time in doing natural horsemanship, and my friends and family and all the people that follow me know that I say this all the time. It's a Pat Pirelli quote, but I love it. And it's take the time it takes, so eventually it takes less time. And I say that to people all the time with their dogs. Just take the time so that eventually it takes less time, but I don't rush any of that. And I certainly wouldn't categorize, any dog that came into my life. I'm going to think about it and go, okay, this is what I think they started off with. But then as they change, I'm going to be like, how interesting. Now you're this. Like,
yeah, for sure. Cool. For sure. All right. Why don't you give everybody, we'll wrap this up. Why don't you give everybody where they can find the quiz? Because I'm sure we'll have some interested people here as far as them trying to figure out their dog's Dogonality. So where can they find it, Tracy?
The Dogonality quiz can be found on my website, which is beyondobedience.ca, not .com, .ca/Dogonality. You can find the quiz there. And I would say, there's going to be, once you finish the quiz and you find out what your dog's Dogonality is, there's a whole series of emails that I send to you that actually talks about what that means, how you can positively, influence each different Dogonality type. And I've done a lot of sort of deep diving into this on how we can actually positively influence them. What are the challenges? What do you need to do to really bond with these kind of dogs? So it's a lot of information that comes your way after you take the quiz, but it's worth the read, I think, anyway.
So let me throw this curveball at you. If somebody's to do this now, and you're saying things kind of change, would it be worth it for them to do it again in 3 months or 6 months and be like, hey, this is what I see now?
Absolutely. I've had people that have asked me, can I just get all the answers for all the other Dogonalities and you send me all the emails so I can just have it start?
That's like system overload.
Yeah. Well, you can certainly do it that way as well. Because I'm like, hey, I'll see it in the emails and I'll be like, hey, your dog was a right brain extrovert, but now you're saying they're a left brain introvert. I'm like, I don't think that's true.
That's a big difference, right? Like,
right. Those are the diagonal ones.
Yes. Like, there's no diagonal axis here that you said.
Right.
Well, Tracy, thank you so much for doing this. This is great. There's a lot of really good information here. Again, her website is beyondobedience.ca. You can take a look, jump over to the Dogonality page, take the quiz, and figure out where your dog sits. So again, nice to finally meet you, Tracy.
As well. Thank you so much for having me.
Hopefully we'll get a chance to meet in person someday and really sit and talk dogs, because
when travel happens again,
I know. Who knows when that's going to be, right?
I don't know.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Tracy. I certainly appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.